So I had this great opportunity to meet Kevin Newman. I'll explain how that happened in the actual podcast when we get actually into the details of the podcast. It's a good story. It's a funny, nerdy story. And Kevin, famous journalist, global news, CTV News, Good Morning America. He did it all. Huge career, and he retired. But it seems like in the news he is not retired. I mean, from in my opinion, this he tells a different story, but there are things that are pulling him out of retirement and causing him to write articles. And I was curious about why. Like why is that happening? What are the things that are causing him to do that? So I reached out. We had this really wonderful conversation. So let's take a listen to how my conversation with Kevin Newman went. Kevin Newman, are you retired? Are you retired? What is retirement like? I'm asking for a friend. I want to know. Are you really retired? I have a sense that you're retired in name alone. Talk to me about
No,
this.
no, I'm not doing any work. Retired is that feeling that you get on Saturday morning when most people know that you have at least a day to do what you want to do. Sometimes those are chores, but there's nobody externally saying, no, not that. So you get complete control over your life. How you exert that control is up to you. It's not up to your boss. It's not up to the task that's before you. You can, you have control over your life. And so it's the best goddamn feeling I've ever had, to be honest. It's like, I mean, the weird thing is there's no money in the in column on your bank account.
Right.
That takes a lot of getting used to and not being fearful about. And you have to, you still live on a budget. You dial down what you spend on. But if you're fortunate enough to have a bit of a nest egg, which I was, it's the best of times.
See, this is by that definition, I'm retired. What you're saying right there. But I don't feel retired yet. Maybe it's the nest egg difference. That's the delta between you and I there. But I know you are still writing. You're still, it's kind of like you've retired from the day-to-day grind of journalism, but you're still active in journalism. Do you find you can't let it go?
I'm active on social media.
Yeah. Yeah. And
I have written a couple of things that, like, when I get really pissed off, I'm active on that. But that's sort of what I feel like doing, not what I'm tasked to do. So
fair enough.
So and I do feel, and maybe this is my ego talking, that the thing that I developed as a skill over time was how to curate information and how to look for various sources on something, try to figure out what's new, what's trending. That was sort of part of the process of putting together a newscast for as long as I did it. So that habit I haven't been able to totally break, and I do sort of curate that kind of stuff on social media. And then, occasionally, because people are under NDAs or they're still employed, I will rail against things that I have unique freedom to do and not worry about, the consequences of, my old boss calling up and saying, hey, you had a pension with us. You shouldn't be talking about us that way. So I have a lot of personal freedom that I think uniquely I can exercise at certain times, but not too often.
Right. So you can be critical of Bell Media on the Globe and Mail, or in, I guess it was Toronto Star as well. One was an interview, one was a piece you wrote earlier this year. So I guess the question is, what makes you angry, Kevin Newman? Talk to me about the things that are making you angry, that is compelling you to dip your toe back into journalism.
I wrote a couple of opinion pieces when Bell Media laid off 4,800 people the last round, and that was, the most people that they had. Actually, it was Bell that laid off 4,800. I should correct that. Without through their whole organization, the biggest layoff that company had in 30 years. But, Bell Media was my employer for 10 years. I enjoyed working there. I had good relationships with senior management that was in time there at the time. But, the media business has just been one large cut after one large cut after one large cut. And I've had shows that were canceled because of that. Many friends who have been laid off, over the past decade. And the last one went so deep in their news organization that I felt that that CTV News basically couldn't do it anymore, and couldn't do it well anymore, and that somebody had to speak up about that, especially at a time that I felt that we're swimming in misinformation and disinformation, and the value to society of a place that verifies facts and tries to sort through all the muck has never been greater. So I took a shot, and I also mentioned that Bell as a company is massively profitable. 42% return on profitability last year. So here was a company that had a division that was strained because of the changing consumer habits, but was cutting that division at a critical time in our democracy, and also refusing to say, well, maybe other parts of the company that are soaring, like wireless and whatever, maybe we have an obligation to the Canadians to move some of that over to support journalism instead of cutting it to the absolute bone, which is what they did.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's kind of the sickening part, right? Of a lot of the layoffs that have happened in years is this fact that these many of the companies are enormously profitable and yet are taking cuts at the weakest divisions. And yeah, sure, business is business, but when this comes to journalism, it's almost like this becomes an assault on truth.
It contributes to the assault on truth because we basically lay down our defense. We basically say, yeah, keep pummeling us with lies, keep pummeling us with distortions. And as the largest owner of the largest and number one media organization in the country, we're going to down tools when it happens, and we're going to make it even harder for the people who remain there to fight. And that really bothered me because who they were laying off were the people who understood context. They were the most expensive employees for sure, but they had institutional memory. They understood context, and they had seen things with their own eyes. I think that's what I worry about most in all these cuts, is that, like, when I was there, or when I was at any of the other networks, the value of sending reporters places to see things with their own eyes and talk to local people, it's vital. You can't understand anything if you're not there and talking to people. And in the last round of cuts, CTV News eliminated all of its bureaus outside of North America, reduced its staff in Washington to one reporter. It got rid of almost every national reporter that had existed in each province, and replaced them with new people who will also shoot and edit and do radio and do online. So the shrinkage was so dramatic and drastic that it was my view, and maybe this is an old fogey's view, but I don't think it is, because I think we're seeing now the results of that. You're seeing on that newscast, you're seeing events in Lebanon and events in Kyiv reported from reporters in Winnipeg or New Brunswick, and they haven't been there. They don't know what to elevate in a story. It's really hard on them to have a feel for a story that they've never witnessed, and so the quality disintegrates. Now, hopefully they'll take this moment, and they've cut it to the bone. Now, if they have a plan, they can rebuild it in a new form. But to this day, after all the cuts, the new way forward and the new plan that they promised, my friends inside say it hasn't been articulated.
So one person, sorry, go back to this. One journalist has to do what? What are all the things they're now responsible for that you said?
So, yeah. So there's a national reporter, let's say in Alberta, a province with two major cities. They cover the whole province and parts of northern Alberta as well. They film the story, they report the story, they edit the story. They have to provide material for the web and their radio networks. And that's one person. So I often ask people at parties, I say, how many people do you imagine work at the national news organization at CTV? And they say 100. And I say, as far as reporters, a dozen, and that's supposed to be covering the world.
A dozen.
And that's not enough to do the job properly, in my view.
That's I did not know that. A dozen. So what is the what do you how do you think about the current state of news, not just at CTV, but like in Canada, in the US, in the world? And what do you think is the way forward? I watched I watched the documentary Disruption, the 20 years of global news, and which was wonderful, which was a wonderful recap. It felt too short. It felt like it should have been a mini series. There was probably too much to cover, certainly in 45 minutes. But the the kind of impact that, and I don't even know, do we still call it this, that citizen journalism, that just the average person with a camera, or the fact that many people get their news from a non-journalist with a camera, or that people might even consider me a journalist and I don't consider myself a journalist. I'm just as a podcast, but anyone can do that, right? Anyone can, with a mic, with a laptop, they they can do this. So what is the state of news today, and what is the way
Yeah.
forward in your opinion?
So news has been democratized, which is a good thing. Anybody who is a witness is a reporter of sorts. They're a raw reporter, let's say. And so the amount of material, very little happens in the world today that isn't captured by somebody, right? Whether it's a citizen, whether it's a GoPro camera on a cop, there is source material, way more source material than when I was coming up through the business. So the good news is things that happen do not have to go unreported. George Floyd was an example of that. We're largely relying, the news organizations now are largely relying on that citizen journalism, that video that someone uploads to YouTube or some other source for the source of their information. So news is much more ubiquitous. What is shrinking at the same time as the source material is becoming massive are the gatekeepers. And the gatekeepers, sometimes they have a bad rep around them. Like, why can't you be a gatekeeper and not me? I'm an intelligent guy. I should be the gatekeeper. And the reason is sometimes people try to fool the gatekeeper. Sometimes they're trying to manipulate the gatekeeper. And journalists have a finely tuned, honed skill for bullshit. We saw a good example of that. The guy who is alleged to have tried to assassinate Trump had approached multiple news organizations claiming that he was trying to recruit fighters for Ukraine. So, that guy would live on YouTube, which he does, and he has a following, right? But no, at least to my knowledge, there were very few, if any, reputable news organizations who ran with his story, because when they called him up, they thought, guy's not sounding right. He sounds like he has big dreams, big aspirations, but this is not a story because what he's claiming doesn't check out. And so they didn't report it. But unfortunately, because media is shrinking, because of the changing consumer habits, because of the corporatization of its ownership, we have fewer and fewer gatekeepers on that. So much more source news, much less verified news. And I think what we have seen in the last few years is that people don't necessarily care, that they consider themselves consumers and that they consider themselves the gatekeepers, and they will be manipulated and be taken because they're kind of being entertained with the role. So I think that's kind of where we're at. I mean, I do worry that I don't know how we come back from this. I don't know how or if journalism and the pursuit of verification and truth will be elevated again, or whether we're just in a soup where we're all going to have to get better and probably trained, hopefully, at schools, but it's not being done currently, on how to verify ourselves. Because more and more things are going to become less and less true. And we could reach the point, and I think we're pretty close to it, where we just assume that nothing is true. And when you assume that nothing is true from points of authority, then you're really engendering authoritarian rule because nobody will feel compelled to challenge it with the truth.
Wow, just a light conversation for a Monday morning, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
then what does that school look like? If I were to if a college or a high school were to embark on a like this is the course in truth, how does the how does a consumer actually initiate and execute that? How do I go through the exercise? I and we can talk a little bit about Twitter, and it's like I still can't call it X. I can't bring myself to call it X, but the and the part it might play in this negatively, in my opinion, today. But what does that course look like? How do I do that as a consumer of news?
Number one, look for people who take ownership of their content. So if you have a story that you're reading, or you have a TikTok video with that, automated voice, figure out the source of where that's coming from. And in a newspaper, reporters have their bylines. In television, networks have their logos. That means you know where to go if you want to sue them, frankly. And that's a pretty important motivator on the part of those companies and those reporters to get it right. If it's anonymous, trust it almost not at all. If people aren't willing to put their name to something, don't trust it. So that gets rid of a whole bunch of stuff, right? Secondly, start from a position that what you're seeing is potentially, or what you're reading is potentially not authentic. Because I think most people most people's feeds now are filled with companies and individuals that are regurgitating other stuff and putting it through their own filter. And then thirdly, don't get angry. What you're reading is making you angry, then likely it's being created to do that. Not inform, not enlighten, but to elicit anger and a reaction. So I call them anger merchants, and they are. They're making money off of anger by selling ads or pushing you a certain direction. So if you find yourself going, "That's outrageous," then the chances are you've been manipulated to feel that way. So
Mm.
check that feeling of outrage and don't contribute to it. Right? Just try to be as zen as you possibly can when you're consuming media, and look for the people who are providing context, trying to enlighten, being, if not completely fair, are being even handed, that you hear multiple voices and multiple opinions within the body of that, and that tells you that it's probably not perfect, might not even be accurate, but it's not trying to make you pissed off. And then if we can teach ourselves that, then maybe we de-elevate and take away the juice of misinformation and disinformation, which is to manipulate our feelings into actions.
In that documentary, Disruption, you hindsight 2020, you started the global national news, right? Global national news. How many days before 9/11? Like 6, 7 days?
Yeah, about that.
Yeah. And then the world changed forever, but it also changed news and reporting forever. Can you talk a little bit about that event, about the genesis of not so much 9/11, but the genesis of global national news and how that evolved over your tenure there?
Yeah, well, as you say, it evolved in the first week. We designed it initially for an era that didn't last very long. So it was designed for an era where, we had the peace dividend. No one had done anything crazy in the world in a decade. And frankly, viewership of newscasts was falling because nobody felt that nobody felt unease. They felt economic unease, but it was a golden time, turns out, and it didn't last. And so as soon as 9/11 happened, suddenly, armies were moving, people felt scared. They, if you were alive then, you remember how Muslims were ostracized suddenly, how the border thickened, how America's fear of being attacked again was visceral, and it caused them to act in certain ways. And how, I remember the day after, Canadian authorities saying, tape up your windows here in Vancouver in case there's a dirty bomb on a freighter that creates radiological damage. So it was a very strange time. And suddenly people turn to the news to be informed and to feel safe, or if not safe, then to have a better understanding of whether they were safe. And so news hardened, and it ramped up. And, it's even faster now. I pity the people who are in the business now, because like, Jesus, like every month, the president of the United States, the former president, there's an assassination attempt on him. There's action in 2 wars. It is anxiety provoking for everybody, and for the people that are reporting the news. I worry about their mental health, because one day you have to explain something horrible here, the next day you're trying to provide context or witnessing something horrible here. There's no pause in it. The world is like a tornado. It's going faster and faster and faster, and people's consumption of the information is on overload, and AI hasn't even begun. So it's a wild world, man.
It's a wild world. I have a bit of a taste of that when I'm putting my newsletter together, and in particular, just trying to itemize everything that happened in the last week related to Elon Musk, like just to try and understand him as a single human being and all of the places that he is operating in. It is absurd. Like, he alone, as a piece of news, global geopolitical force, business force, alone is absurd. He sounds more and more like a Bond villain. Like, increasingly, he sounds like a James Bond villain. But
well, the guy's like, he's putting billionaires into orbit. He's launching, starships to Mars. He's like, a new Tesla's coming out. He's moving them to Texas. He's like, I don't know how it all flows through one man's brain, to be honest. He seems to want to, play a role in culture and leadership.
And maybe he shouldn't. Like, maybe he should stop somewhere. He should draw a line and pull back a little bit. But that's a whole other podcast.
Can't do all that well.
Yeah, he can't do it. He really needs to learn from Orville Redenbacher, right? Like, do one thing, do it well. That would be somebody needs to give him a bag of microwave popcorn and tell him to chill. And that would be probably much.
No kidding.
Yeah. My favorite little anecdote, and I love how at the end of the documentary, all of the journalists that were being interviewed show a bit of the lighthearted side of news, which I also feel like we don't get anymore. Like, there isn't, it's either so soft it's ludicrous, like it's like, oh, it's puppies, but it's not like the authentic element of like, this is just good fun or a blooper or an error. And you say it's true. I haven't done it myself, but can you really shotgun a beer faster on a Learjet during takeoff than not? Because that's important information that I think the public needs, Kevin Newman.
It's amazing how many people say that, because it's it's out of my television character. It's not out of my character, but yeah, it's true. And pilots know this for some reason.
Pilots know that. That's disconcerting, though. That's
yeah, isn't it? Yeah, but yeah. So if and the pilots were in on it too. So they would hold back the engines and hold back the brakes on it, so that when we took off, we were doing an election campaign on a Learjet, which sounds incredibly amazing, and it was. But there'd be this ritual that we'd have where they go, you'd hear the jets go, and they'd hold on to the brakes as long as they could. And then they let the brakes go, so the G-force of the jet taking off was significant. And if you'd shotgun a beer at that exact moment, your time on it is like 2 to 3 times faster, because the G-force like throws it down your gullet. And yeah, we were younger. It was 20 years ago.
It was a different time.
Now I have one beer and I'm ready for bed.
Fair. But see, now this is where maybe that's where all of those billionaires who are promoting like recreational space travel need to add that to the equation.
Yes.
Like, can you,
Learn to
if you
shotgun a
add,
beer.
yeah, we're going to go near Earth orbit, but also you can shotgun a beer
Yeah.
in 2-3 times what you might, in Earth's
Yeah, that's
gravity. That would be a good selling point.
indeed.
But it was fun. That was fun. You guys,
I had a lot of fun. Like, we had a lot of fun. And you're right. We're all so bloody serious and stern and whatever on camera that, showing more of the fun and showing the collection of the stuff is something I always wanted to do in a newscast. It sort of gets squeezed out, but I had another show which only lasted about 7 months at CTV. It was on their news channel, and we recorded the editorial meeting. We tried to be a little more transparent about the fun that we have, and how you go there, and it was good. You get to know personalities. I think part of the problem is that people associate journalists with, the talking heads of news channels, who are blowhards by and large. But most of the work of journalism is, people that are not paid well, who believe in it as a calling to some degree, who are curious, nosy gossips, who want to see things with their own eyes and have lots of experiences. And, who wouldn't want that life, aside maybe from the pay, and the pay is really terrible. Like, I mean, at the top, it's quite good. So I was well paid. But, a national journalist in Canada doesn't break six figures on their salaries almost ever. And so it's hard work. It's emotional work. It's creative work. It's not well paying. You can't generally, support a family on it, but it's fun.
nice, nice. What do you think? I just thought of this question, but what is your opinion of comedy news? I feel like I get most of my point of view on what might be going on in the US through the likes of like a Seth Meyers or a Bill Maher. As a actual journalist, as a credible journalist, how do you think about the comedy journalism that seems to be the source of news, especially for US politics, for so many people outside of the US?
Well, I'm not surprised. It is funny. I mean, it's just great to watch. It's entertaining. It's smart. But what they've taken, I think, is something that journalism let them take. And that was being the obnoxious person who says, "I'm not sure I totally believe you." Like, there's an adversarialness to the comedy that they've taken that used to be practiced more often in journalism. If you old enough to remember Sam Donaldson at ABC, he was always impertinent, asking the impertinent, embarrassing question, and being fairly aggressive on, the absurdity of the message track. I think often what's happened, and I think it's because of too few reporters, too little time, is there's too much megaphone journalism going on. He said this, the prime minister says this, the opposition leader says this, and that's megaphone work. That's not going to the prime minister after he says it and says, "Prove it to me. How do you know that? What facts do you mean?" Like, that basic stuff isn't being done as effectively anymore. And so I think comedians have taken up that mantle, and they will challenge that in a way that is quite, traditionally journalistic, along the way with being funny. But, they're cherry picking for their philosophy. Obviously they're more often supporters of the Democratic Party than the Republican Party, but they're comedians. That's okay. They can be. Where we lose track of that is when, none of those comedians claim to be journalists. In fact, they make a point of saying they're not. But I think some people think they are. But what they are is they're saying to, people in power, prove it. What you're saying is just absurd, or it's a word salad. It's meaningless. So often the words that come out of leaders are just ridiculously vague, and are too demonstrative, and aren't being challenged, and so comedies pick that up, I think.
I mean, Jon Stewart really, he wrote the book on how to. He didn't. There isn't really a
Yeah,
book.
did
I
he
don't
ever?
think.
He's
Yeah.
never been better than he is right now.
And so I was reminded of him because of your comment around showing the production meeting, because at least on his Apple TV show, RIP Apple TV show, Jon Stewart, Apple
Hmm.
TV. But he did that. Like they sat around and they showed, that, which was kind of interesting, that he wasn't the smartest guy in the room, and that there was a lot of other people who were working to fact check the things that he was talking about, or they were really constructing a story. Like that was the
Mm.
journalistic effort. Then maybe that's why it wasn't as successful, and that's also what kind of got him into trouble, I think, is that they started to be more critical of Apple. And
Apple, yeah,
hard to be critical of Apple while you are being paid by Apple, hard to be critical of Bell Media
yeah,
when you're
being
working for
paid by
Bell
them,
Media. but
of
uh
course.
but I appreciate the candor. Maybe that's more of what we need. Like maybe
Oh,
the
100%, man. I agree, because I would like to show that it's sloppy and that these are just human beings taking their best guess, and that there is a process of verification and fact checking that goes on. For some reason, journalism still doesn't do that enough. There are some places that are like Semaphore that have grown up, and some of the newer, newsletter style publications are doing a better job of tending to that territory, because I mean, we've journalism unfortunately doesn't always recognize what bad shape its reputation is. I mean, like, I have many friends who just go like, you guys just say nonsense, or you say what the corporate bosses say, or the political bosses call you up and say this, and you just say it. And like, none of that's true. Never been true in my career, and it's never been true for anybody that, I've worked with. We are independent arbiters of that. But to your point, if we don't show more of our work and how we get to places, and when we're uncertain of what it is, which I think is important, then we're not going to be believed, because we haven't trusted our readers and viewers with the mess of our work. And I think they need to see it to know that it is not, dictated from powerful people, but is in fact a group of people like you and me sitting around trying to figure out what's the right thing to tell people today.
Do you want to start a YouTube channel with me? Do you want to start a no? We don't want
You could do that.
right? We could
That
just
would
do
that would be
that.
work though, and I'm retired.
Oh, I'm still questioning whether you're retired. I suspect you're. You see, the difference is, and it's hard, and also no one told you could do this, I think, and it's definitely harder when you're younger. Is that it's more about autonomy, right? Like I think you would like to work more than you are working, but you don't want anyone telling you what to do, and
That's very true. And I think like autonomy is, to me, what you spend your career trying to achieve, right? And so once you get it, it's really hard to let it go, right? Like and you have to. I mean, age comes into it. Like at some point in your 50s, you look around and you're the oldest person in the room, and you just have to, accept that this is the time for other people to try it their way. And then when you can't do that anymore, then it's up to you to go. But autonomy is hard to get in any business, I think. And so if you're able to enjoy a period of it, you're right. It's hard to let it go.
See, I'm not here pitching you on creating a new news network, not yet, but maybe I'll come back to you with some ideas and we can put something together. A slightly different topic. A few years back now, you wrote a book with your son, which I appreciate so much because I have a young son. Well, he's not young. He's like, 16 going on 30. But the talk to me a little bit about the book, your thoughts coming into writing it, your thoughts coming out of writing it. It, in a way, the story seems to emulate what we just described of as news, right? That you kind of showed the messy side of this is what it was like to be a father working as hard as you did when you were working when your son was growing up, and now I'm telling your story, but the
No, but thank you.
yeah, and the coming back to how do you reconcile that? Like, and I have had all of those thoughts myself around that. Did I work too hard when I was younger, and did I miss important things, which I'm sure I did.
Yeah, well,
As
yes and yes, but do you give yourself, um, you have to at some point, because we carry a lot of guilt, anybody who works as hard as you worked and I worked, and supported a family, and pursued our ambition, you know, and and found ourselves at the center of cool shit that we really liked. And so we took some of that too. I had written the book not intending to be as open as as I ended up being, but my son was very open as he wrote it. And for the listeners, we co-wrote the book, but we wrote in isolation under the guidance of an editor about various aspects of our life together, and what we learned separately that in the end we could have learned together. And that's on both of us. That's just not on the dad. Sometimes the kids close up, right? I mean, if you have a 16-year-old son, I'm betting he's not very talkative.
he no, no, he is not, it's like, "How was your day?" "Good."
Yeah.
End of story.
Yeah.
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 Thanks.
So it's not only us. Communication's two ways, but we're the adults in the room, so we got to initiate it most time and lock them in cars to do it. But the genesis of it was I was doing a story for W5 on a young hockey player who had come out to his hockey team. He was a goalie, and what that looked like. Now this was a while ago, before reporting on LGBTQ2 issues was commonplace. This was a big deal for CTV to explore this, and I explored it because my son Alex is gay, and I was curious. And then anyway, so I ended up talking to him, talking to his family, asking his dad questions, asking his mom, and then during that interview process, realizing I'm asking this family I don't know questions that I haven't asked my own family or myself. And so out of that, I talked to Alex, and I talked to my wife Kathy and daughter Erica, and I said, maybe how we're struggling through this, because there were no guidances. We didn't have friends at that time who we knew were going through the same thing. I, as a father, had no references, no one I could talk to about how to handle this and how to navigate this. What if we wrote a story about the way we did it? And anyway, so long story short, it came down to a story between a father and a son, and all that means, and the miscommunication that happens, and how he interpreted my ambition, how I interpreted his indifference, and bullying that we both had, verbal bullying in growing up, and how we viewed masculinity, and how he had something to teach me as a young gay man that about being authentic and standing up for yourself and who you are, that I needed to apply to my working life. So it was we took 3 years to write it. It was free therapy, but man, it was hard to relive it all. And then at the end, we had this moment where he took his manuscript, I had mine. We crossed them over and read them in front of one another. And that just elicited a whole bunch of other discussions that I could have never imagined. It was great.
The amount of trust you must have put into that to put those 2 stories together.
Well, I wanted to stay in his life. And there's no guarantee that you ever stay in your kid's life if you don't connect. I thought we had connected at a higher level than he did. He didn't feel we had connected really much at all. And I thought I'd done most things right. I'd embraced him, told him I loved him, I encouraged him, I went to gay bars. I thought I did everything right, but he was watching me so carefully and closely that he knew that this was hard for me to adjust to. And so it was, yeah. So, and I also realized too that he was being fathered by older gay men in his community. And so I thought, oh, I have to fight to stay here. And the way that I'm going to fight to stay here, because I wanted to, is by revealing my own vulnerabilities and my own uncertainties, and examining myself, and talking to him and asking him awkward questions, and all that stuff. And I largely, not fully, but largely succeeded in finding a place that he needed me still for, at a time when I was worried that I was going to be replaced.
It's hard, and I think it's also generationally informed that, you know, my parents, your dad, my dad, they were definitively not equipped to have the conversation that you just articulated, or even speak in the manner in which you just did. That did not happen, right?
Right.
And
They
there
didn't
was
have the language
they
for it.
didn't more that it wasn't even they didn't have the language, they weren't told they could have the
A
language.
language.
Like, yeah,
Right.
I think it was even more profoundly, shrouded, locked, shut down. And I think a lot about how, in the case of my own father, right, that his life was informed by his father coming back from World War I, World War II, and that, it was just the definition of masculine was you didn't talk about it. Like that was and that
Yeah.
took, took 2, 3, now 4 generations to unpack, to say, no, we have feelings, we should be able to talk about them too.
Well, and I think in my generation, and I don't know about you, but like I also adopted some of that of like, I'm gonna I'm the adult in the room. I'm not gonna share when I'm scared. I'm not gonna share my own vulnerabilities or when I'm uncertain or how I've been fucked over by people. Right. I'm gonna be the hero dad in my kid's life. And that's not what my son wanted or needed. He needed to know again the mess of my life to feel like his wasn't so much messier than mine.
No, 100%, that makes
So
sense.
yeah, so sharing that time, you know, I don't know if we need to share our drug use habits when we were kids and all the rest of that stuff, but but sharing how insecure I felt in asking somebody out, or like how do you like all that stuff, keeping that line of communication open, and in times especially when you were lost and depressed or uncertain, then maybe that gives them permission to think that they're not failures in our eyes, because they elevate us, especially fathers more than mothers. They elevate us to a place where they worry that we will reject them too often, that we will do that. And it was a piece of research that I saw that, fathers are the biggest impediment to kids coming out because they fear their judgment. And so somehow, we've made ourselves a little bit too judgmental and too perfect in their eyes, that they don't know us and trust us enough with their mess.
Right.
And so I think that's that's generally what I tell fathers is like, take the shield down if you have one. You don't have to be perfect. And in fact, every time that you can share the story that you're not the fucking hero of it, maybe that's better for your kids.
Right. It's not a job interview, right? This is
No,
not a
no.
performance
Where we're
evaluation.
all accustomed to projecting our perfect selves, right?
Yeah. Yeah. My son, in the summer, we were out at the, kind of sitting out at the water and up on Lake Huron. And he said, something very endearing, where he said, Dad, and he, through our sort of modern family situation, he has 4 parents. He has 4 parents. And he said, Dad, you're the parent I want to be the most alike, which felt wonderful. And then I said, but don't do that. Just be yourself. Like, don't try and be me,
Yeah.
because that's not going to work well. Like, that shouldn't be your
Yeah.
goal. Your goal shouldn't be to be me.
Yeah.
Just be the best version of you can be.
And he was probably saying that you're probably the parent that he can feel comfortable saying that to, like that he can communicate with, which is wonderful. Congratulations.
Yeah. It could change tomorrow.
Yes, it could. And it will. Especially after he sees that you talked about it on a podcast.
Well, he's not listening to this. Come
Okay,
on.
okay, good.
He does read the newsletter, because I'm a huge fan of music. And even though in some ways I'm sure there are people who subscribe and are like, why is this in here? But I do an entire section that I call Kick Out the Jams. And
Oh yeah.
sometimes I include a little segment I like to call Heard Through the Bathroom Wall, where where it's like this is a song that my son played over a Bluetooth speaker while he was showering. I have no
Oh,
idea
yeah.
what it is. I've
That's
never
great.
heard this. Yeah,
That's a great concept.
heard through the bathroom wall. Um,
That's great.
but my my I don't know if it's my last. It's the last one I've written down.
Okay.
Kevin is the and that is the how we met, which is so hilarious relative to this conversation. So it's very clear that I am a nerd, like I am a nerd, and talk about how that's like I'm a nerd from a small town, and that it's hard to be a nerd it's hard growing up being the nerd in a small town, but then eventually you grow up and you get a job at Google and things are much better for you. Like that
Yeah.
your nerdiness pays off eventually. But we both met because we both love Star Trek. We both love Star Trek, and we got to tour through a mutual friend the Star Trek Discovery set, which still, oh my God, how amazing was that little
There, I
experience?
just gave myself away too.
So, talk about how nerdy you are, and tell me about your love of Star Trek. And
Well, I 4 o'clock coming home from school when I was a kid. There it was in syndication, and just that whole optimistic worldview where everybody gets along and we get to explore and have adventures. Yeah, I'm hooked lifelong. Like I've never gone to a convention. I've never gone in that deep, but I've interviewed almost all of the original actors and some of the next generation actors, which has been fun. And I watch every episode of every series that comes on television. Um, like not all of them, but still I still appreciate it massively. And then when we were there and we could like walk around, I mean, we're both grown ass men now. We know that it's a set, right? It's not a real spaceship. However, walking through the doors and sitting in the chair and seeing what the actors see and looking at how spectacular and cheap everything looks in person, that was a very cool day.
it was a cool day. I saw you posted the chair, you sitting in the captain's chair right around the finale of Star Trek Discovery, and I was like, bastard didn't give me photo credit. Come on, I thought he was a
Oh, is that you?
journalist.
Thank you. I forgot. Well, they tell you that you're never supposed to do it. Number one, sit in the chair, and then number two, don't, for God's sakes, don't post a picture. But I thought, oh hell, it's going off the air. And that series too, they sort of broke through the fourth wall and allowed a lot more behind the scenes stuff, and took people inside the set and the rest. But I really appreciate what they're doing to the franchise. Like they're trying stuff around it, around the brand, and some of it hits, some of it doesn't. But they're not resting on their laurels. They're trying to invent and reinvent and I don't know if you remember, but when we were leaving, they had said that the Enterprise set was in, and we couldn't get in to see it. And that's still the greatest regret of my life.
That we should have brought bolt cutters and stormed into
Yeah,
the
we should have
Enterprise set.
just snuck in the fucking pipes and gone through the Jeffries tubes to get to it.
But we knew where it was. We could have come back under cover of night. It didn't seem like it
I
was so
know.
secure that we couldn't have.
You still can.
I mean, they're still shooting Strange New Worlds, and that
Yeah.
series is spectacular. Doing such a good job. They're doing such a good job.
Yeah. Yeah. I love the creative risks they're taking. Anytime you can watch people taking creative risks, it's just exhilarating to me.
The Next Generation favorite episode. Can you name a favorite episode of either original or next gen?
Yesterday's Enterprise.
I was good. So I knew I liked you for a reason, but that's the Yesterday's Enterprise is top of my sorry people who just tuned out and aren't listening to the rest of the
Yeah.
podcast. We just
Yeah.
nixed like half or less than of our audience. Yesterday's
We just went
Enterprise,
down the rabbit hole.
that's right. But also Best of Both Worlds Part 1 and 2 are also would be
Classics.
classic on the Next Gen series. I had every episode on VHS. I pirated every episode of Next Gen when it was in syndication, and that became very coveted in my town. People were like, "Can I borrow the tapes? Can I borrow the
Oh,
tapes?"
You were the Star Trek dealer.
I was apparently I didn't know what a bootlegger was at the time, I think, but I was bootlegging Nation across town. So
Yeah,
yeah,
brilliant. Well, now because of streaming, it's on everywhere, somewhere, sometime.
yeah, yeah. And of the interviews you did of the cast, who was your favorite? What was the most memorable Star Trek cast member interview that you did?
Leonard Nimoy, probably.
Leonard Nimoy.
Um, yeah, he was. It was one of the first interviews I ever did. I was a student at Western, and he was touring with a one-man show based around Da Vinci's brother. Believe it or not, strange thing. But anyway, yeah. So, and this was before any of the movies, and yeah, it was Star Wars had just come out, and they hadn't done the first Star Trek movie, and he was in negotiation for whatever, and he sat down, and I really studied for this. I studied his filmography, his love of Shakespeare, his interest in classical art, and so I did a very sort of intellectual interview with him. And at the end of it, he said, "How old are you?" And I said, "Well, I'm 21. I'm on campus." He said, "Keep doing this. You're. I really appreciated the conversation, and you're brand new at it, so don't change." And I thought, "Oh, damn. Okay, if Spock says I'm doing it, I'm doing it."
Spock inspired your generations long career in journalism. That's the
Yeah.
That is a wonderful note to end on. I had no idea. That's so we can thank Leonard Nimoy for all of the work that you've done over the years.
God rest his soul.
Wow. Any final parting thoughts? Anything else you want to say to people before we wrap for today?
No, just thanks for your interest. It's lovely to be at this stage in life and look back on such fun stuff. And I hope you feel the same way. Sometimes you don't get the same peaks as time goes on. You don't feel the same vibe. But if you've had great experiences, you can just sort of take that as part of your story and just hold on to it. And, not every chapter is exciting, but every chapter is yours.
I don't think our private jet beer shotgunning days are over yet, Kevin, though.
I
So
hope not, man.
if
Come on,
either of
let's go.
us gets on a private jet in sometime in the future, I think it behooves the other to call and invite them to actually, just verify the facts. We just want to verify the facts that it is in fact faster on a jet and go
Yeah,
from
I'll
there.
put money on it.
Okay. Thank you very much for the time. This has been really
All right,
wonderful.
Matthew. Pleasure. It was really fun.
That was a good conversation. And yeah, for science, it turns out if you want to really shotgun a beer, you should do that while taking off in a Learjet, in a private jet. So Kevin, if you ever get the opportunity to fly in a private jet again, I'm going to hold you to that. Thanks for listening. Please subscribe to this podcast. It does matter. That's very helpful. Also, go check out my newsletter at thechangeoptimist.com. The episodes of this podcast are there as well. As always, want to thank Dark Tapes for the music for this podcast, which I enjoy so much every time I edit one of these episodes. So thank you. Thank you for that. And again, thanks everyone for listening.